What is up, everyone? In today's video, we're going to recreate the animation that Robinhood uses to display portfolio values in their web app. Remember, links to this code will be in the description below. And if you want to see how I use this component in a dashboard app in a future video, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. Now let's head over to Robinhood's website and see what the animation looks like. So over here on the left, we have the animation that we're going to be recreating today. The first thing I want to point out is that it only animates the number that it needs to when it's changing between two numbers. So if we look here at the ones place, the tens, hundreds, and so on, it's only going to animate the number that it needs to. The other thing I want to point out is that you see that pulse of color as it's animating, and it indicates whether the value is going up or down. Now that we've taken a look at how the animation looks like on Robinhood's website, let's do a rough sketch of what we plan on building, and this is going to allow us to think through the problem a little bit more before diving straight into the code. Okay, so let's say we wanted to display the number 572. Now we know that these numbers are going to animate individually. So the first thing that comes to mind is that these are going to be separated into their own columns, if you will. So we're going to render the number. It's going to look like it's rendered all together, but behind the scenes in the DOM, we have to split this up somehow so we have individual control over each number. Now, since I need to show the previous number and the next number, I'm gonna have to have those somewhere. So I'm gonna have the numbers 0 through 9 in a list ready and handy to be displayed. So you can imagine over here we'll have 3 and a 1. Here we'll have an 8, 6, 5, and so on. But we're obviously not showing all these numbers at once. We want them hidden somewhere. So behind the scenes, we'll have a box over this, and we'll set this to overflow hidden, and that will allow us to hide everything that's outside of this container. And now whenever we want to change one of these numbers, then we can move one of these columns individually up and down. So the idea is it's gonna look kind of like a slot machine where you have these things spinning, and we're gonna lock it into the appropriate number. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're getting into code-wise and how we're structuring it with HTML right before diving into the code. So now that we have a basic understanding of our UI and the layout, we're ready to dive into the code. All right, so here in my project, I have an empty CSS file that's wired up, ready to go. I have this numbers page that has some basic layout stuff set up for me. Here's the component that we're going to be building out. Right now I'm passing it in a prop that has a name of value, and we're going to pass in a number. And now over here in that component that we're building out, we have the value property ready to be used, and we're ready to get started. So the first thing we want to do is set up some formatting. So we want to take in this number that's coming in and split it up so we can control each digit individually. So I've already written this function over here called format for display. And what it's going to do is it's going to take in that number. It's going to convert it to a floating point number because we're going to show the 2 zeros. We're going to call to fixed, which just makes sure we're showing 2 decimal places. And then we're going to do something interesting with it. We're going to actually reverse it and display it in reverse order. And this part is pretty important, and I'll explain why in a bit. So this is what our current number looks like. We can see that it formatted it for us. It added the 2 zeros and it reversed it, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to loop over this array, and we're going to start building out each of these number columns. Okay, so I've created the basic column structure that we're going to use. You can see here that we're rendering all of the numbers 0 through 9 from top to bottom, and right now they're just laid out stacked on top of each other. But it's doing exactly what we want. We're looping over each one of the numbers that are passed in and creating a number column for it. Now let's add in some basic CSS that's going to format this the way that we need it. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the structure and figure out exactly what's going on here. We have our overall ticker view, and then each one of these are built out into their own separate columns. Now inside of that, there's a really long column that spans all the way to the top, and individually you can see we've rendered all of the numbers. They're just hidden off screen. And then at the very bottom, we have this interesting thing set up, this number placeholder. If we take a look at the CSS for number placeholder, it's using visibility hidden. So we're not displaying it at all, but we need to show a number in this container for the column to respect the height. So the overall column is 1000%. That gives us one big column that gives us space for all 10 of our digits. And then each digit is 10% of that height. So it ends up, the math ends up rounding out. And what we have is each digit takes up the exact space that's available, thanks to this neat trick by rendering this number placeholder. Since visibility is hidden, it's not displayed, but it takes up space, it just doesn't show it. Okay, one thing we're not accounting for right now is that one of these is actually the decimal place. So we need to create, I'm just gonna create a new component here called decimal column, and all it does is render some empty divs with a decimal place so that we can use that here. So now if we head back into where we're rendering the actual number columns, we can do a quick check here. So we'll check if the number we're passing in is actually not a number and it's a decimal place, go ahead and render this decimal column. If not, we'll render this number column. And now we can see that we have the exact correct number of places. The decimal column is in the right spot. And now going back to this being reversed, if we go over here in ticker view, we use flex direction row reverse to flip it back. So now this might seem a little counterintuitive. It's like, okay, why are we reversing it just to reverse it back? Well, the reason is that we have to preserve animating the right column for the right digit. If we started rendering it from the very beginning, if in this case from the hundreds, if that number changed and it went from, let's say 100 to 99, then all of those numbers would get pushed forward and the animation wouldn't work properly. So if we start from the lowest number by reversing it, we're able to start with the smallest value and work our way up. And since it only grows in the other direction, that means our animation will always work as intended. So now that we have this working, let's go ahead and pass in a digit. We'll pass in the actual number we're trying to display into number column. And now we have to go over into number column and wire up this logic so that when we pass it in a digit, the number column will properly show the digit that it's supposed to show. So I'm gonna go ahead and add that now, and then I'll explain what's going on afterwards. Okay, so we have the basic logic in place so that we can take in the digit and then move the column to the proper position. So what's happening right now is we have this state variable position that's going to keep track of what position this number column is supposed to display. Then we're going to use useRef to keep a reference to the column container. Now the reason we do that is because we're going to need that height later on to make sure we're animating it to the right position. So we're essentially doing position offset to get it to the right position. And then finally, we're going to have a use effect that's triggered whenever the digit changes, and it's going to call set column to number and update this column to the right digit. Now, the last thing we need to do here is take this div, which is the inner column that holds 0 through 9 all the way up, the one that has 1000% height, and we're going to change this to a motion div, and that's going to give us the fancy animations that we want. And wiring up motion here, or framer motion, is really simple. All we need to do is pass it an animate prop, and then here we're animating the y-axis and we're giving it that position. And there you go. Right away we see the page animates. So to give you an idea of what this position is, we can log this out. And you can see the actual values that are passing out are actual pixel values, and it's giving us that because we know the height of this column container. And with just a little math, we're able to figure out the exact position. So now the next thing we want to do here is animate the color before it changes. So depending if it's going up or down, then we want to animate it green or red. So I'm going to head over to our CSS file and just wire up a basic animation that's going to give us the result we want. So head down here to the bottom, and we have this pretty simple animation. So we have this class called increase and decrease. And based on that, we're going to add an animation of pulse green or pulse red. And we're going to give it the same duration and the same animation curve. What pulse green is going to do is it's going to go from 0 to 50%. It's going to go green. And then it's going to go from green back to white. And then red does the exact same thing. So I'm going to save that. So now if we add this increase class over to our ticker column, we can see that it went green and went back to white. And the same thing with decrease, went red and then went back to white. So we know that our CSS is set up properly. Now the next challenge is figuring out whether the value went up or down. And to do that, we actually need to know what the value of the previous render cycle was. Now to do that, I had to do some searching, and I found a hook called use previous written up in a post. I'll make sure to leave a link to that post in the description so you can see where I found it. So I already have this in a separate file. It's going to use ref behind the scenes, and it's going to give us access to our previous value. Now I'm going to wire up that use previous hook so I could determine if the value that's going into our number column is either increasing or decreasing. And in a bit, I'll explain exactly how that works. Let's take a quick look and break down the logic we just added. We're going to use the use previous hook and pass it in a value. This is going to return previous number at first. It won't give us the first time. If this use previous has no previous value, then this will just be empty. And then we're going to determine if it's increasing or decreasing and then pass that in to the number column. Now this has to do with the overall number that's changing, not the individual number columns if they're going up or down. So now that we have access to this delta value, let's go ahead and use that inside of our number column. Okay, so we've gone ahead and added some logic to use that delta value and add the animation class based on that. So we added another variable called animation class, another state variable. And then again, we're using this use previous hook, and that's going to allow us to determine if we already applied any logic to this previous digit. So let's say the overall value is going up from 100 to 101. The only one that needs the color is the value that's changing. So in that case, that last one would need the color. So we keep track to the previous digit, and then we use another use effect hook. And then based on the digit and the delta value, those are going to change. We're going to set the animation class only if it's not the same as the previous digit, and we're going to set that to the delta value, so the increase or decrease string. And then over on our div, on our ticker column div, we're going to just add the animation class to our class list. And now if this increases from 133 to 134, we see that the color pulsed. Sweet. And just for example, if we didn't do this check with the previous digit, we can see what this would look like. So if we always set this to the delta value, you can see that all the colors light up, and that's not what we want. So by having this check in place, we're only animating the color on the digits that we want. Okay, so now that animation's wired up, let's add in a few controls just to see what this would look like in action. Okay, so here I just set up a couple controls, a plus button and minus button, so that we can increase this manually from the UI. And then below we have to see what this would look like if the values were actually changing in real time. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this.